How Pakistani fighter jets' tactics won the final battle. At dawn on May 7, 2025, against the backdrop of military skirmishes between India and Pakistan. The world was shocked by the news that Pakistani fighter jets had shot down 5 Indian fighter jets. The entire world wondered how Pakistan was able to win, despite the theoretical superiority of advanced Indian fighter jets. Today, we will discuss the clever tactics employed by Pakistani fighters to overcome the technological superiority of Indian aircraft. First, we will discuss the Indian Air Formation, consisting of the Falcon Command and Control aircraft, the ALW-2090. This is an early warning aircraft with a detection range of up to 500 kilometers. Its mission is not to fight, but rather to track targets, manage the battlefield, and direct Indian fighters toward Pakistani fighters. The rest of the terrifying Indian Air Formation consists of heavy fighters, such as the Su-30, and multi-role fighters, such as the Rafale and MiG-29. The Pakistani Air Formation is the smartest and most integrated. The backbone was based on 2 Chinese fighters, the JF-17 and the J-10C, with the rearmost ones, early warning and command aircraft such as the Saab 2000. The Pakistani plan was based on a calculated lure of Indian fighters into a meticulously prepared ambush. They were prepared and awaited the enemy Indian fighters by monitoring their departure early. Once the Indian aircraft were spotted, taking off from their bases, the Pakistani fighters began moving quickly to reach the pre-planned ambush points. The Pakistani Air Force's tactics effectively exploited the limitations of India's radar visibility. Pakistan has a good understanding of the capabilities of Indian early warning aircraft, which can detect any aircraft from a range of up to 500 kilometers, but only if the aircraft are at a high altitude and in open air. This means that if the Pakistani fighter is at a low altitude of 100 or 200 meters and hidden in the terrain of the Kashmir Mountains, Indian radar cannot detect it. Pakistani aircraft entered the scene from below the visual range of Indian radars, exploiting the vulnerability of Indian early warning aircraft. The Pakistani fighters flew very low, taking cover in the terrain of the Kashmir Mountains. This was the first deception the Pakistani fighters pulled off. The second deception in the Pakistani plan was that their fighters carried out the operation without turning on their radars. In short, any fighter's radar emits electromagnetic waves to search for enemy fighters. However, at the same time, these waves also make the location of the same fighter easily visible to enemy reconnaissance equipment. In other words, if a Pakistani fighter turned on its radar, it would reveal its location to Indian radars and become an easy target for Indian fighters. Therefore, the Pakistani fighters decided to turn off their radars. This operation is described as in which Pakistani fighters conducted their operations in complete silence. However, this raises a question. When Pakistani fighters turn off their radars, how can they detect Indian fighters? Here, the Pakistani Air Force's ingenious plan is complete. What happened during the battle was that Pakistani early warning aircraft behind the Pakistani fighters were monitoring the battlefield from a long distance. Their radar range is powerful, covering approximately 500 kilometers in all directions, and they were tracking the movement of Indian fighters in the air. Once they detected Indian targets, they sent real-time data on those targets to the Pakistani fighters. Consequently, the Pakistani fighters did not need to turn on their radars, as they were essentially informed of the locations of the Indian fighters and the entire battlefield by the early warning aircraft operating in the rear. Here, the Pakistani fighter jet played a crucial role in hitting the enemy target. The original version of the missile, the PL-15, has a range of 300 kilometers, while the export version used by Pakistan has a range of 150 kilometers. One of the missile's advantages is that it can be launched from a fighter with its radar turned off. This also raises the question of how to guide a missile toward a target from a fighter with its radar turned off. The answer will also come from early warning aircraft, which transmit data on the location of Indian fighters to the Pakistani fighter, which in turn stores the coordinates of the enemy target in the missile before launch. After launching, the missile determines its path toward the target using an internal navigation system. During its flight, the target data is updated through a data link between the missile and the early warning aircraft. When the missile reaches a close range of the target, it turns on its radar and begins the target detection phase, the Indian fighter, in order to accurately hit it. One of the expected scenarios for the Pakistani plan is that one of the Pakistani aircraft advanced in front of the squadron to show itself to the Indian fighter jets, forcing the Indian fighter jets to turn on their radars so they could accurately locate and target the Pakistani fighter. At the same time, the Indian fighter jets' location was revealed as soon as they turned on their radars. At that moment, the Pakistani J-10C fighter jet was in the rear, waiting for Indian fighter data from Pakistani early warning aircraft. When the target was identified, the Pakistani fighter launched its missiles at the Indian fighters. Ultimately, the Indian fighters entered the battle with arrogance, taking into account their advanced fighter aircraft. However, what the Indian fighters failed to take into account was the Pakistanis' high level of preparedness in terms of stealth and networked guidance, not for direct engagement or air control. The Indian fighters were flying high, while the Pakistani fighters were quietly flying at extremely low altitudes. Ultimately, the Pakistanis were able to transform all their weaknesses into strengths. Even the less advanced fighters, when integrated into the combat system efficiently and effectively, became a source of strength. The PL-15 missile was not just a weapon, it was a complete engagement tactic that enabled Pakistani aircraft to strike from a safe distance without revealing themselves, placing the Indian fighter jets on the defensive, unaware of who was attacking them.